today have a balance of geographic perspectives as well. I think this really reflects the diverse background and places of folks in the room. We have a suburban and a city perspective for you today. And I really would like to more formally introduce those panelists who can provide their different points of view on the missing middle. On our right is Ghian Foreman, Executive Director of the Greater Southwest Development Corporation and the Managing Partner of the Washington Park Development Group. Ghian has worked steadily to make a name for himself in both the fields of real estate and community investment. Since taking over as Executive Director, he has been tasked with growing the community in a way that benefits the people. Ghian has been much more than a rescuer of troubled property. He's been an inspiration for a neighborhood hit hard by the subprime mortgage mess and its after effects. A businessman first, he streamlined the organization internally and innovated its approach to commercial and industrial development up and down 63rd Street. He is also managing partner of the Washington Park Development Group in the Washington Park area for over 13 years. He holds an MBA from the University of Chicago Lewis School of Business and a BS in Business Administration from Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. Sitting next to Ghian and giving the architectural perspective is Jaime Torres Carmona, founder and principal of Canopy Architecture and Design. Jaime is a registered architect in Illinois who also operates in other U.S. states. His passion for and sensitivity to people, places, and the built environment developed from living in two densely populated cities, Mexico City and Chicago. And he has used these experiences to form the foundation for Canopy. He founded Canopy in 2009, inspired by the notion that design could be influenced by research and consequently be formed through a participative process. He provides leadership in design and research projects ranging from master planning to design of single-family homes, multi-family buildings, community centers, and other building types. He holds a Master and BS of Architecture from the University of Illinois at Urbana. And then finally, providing the municipal perspective is Tammie Grossman, the Development Customer Services Director of the Village of Oak Park. Tammie has 20 years of experience in federal and state housing programs. She has served as legal services attorney for 15 years with Prairie State Legal Services. As managing attorney for one of Prairie State's 9 offices, she supervised a staff of 9 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and 3 support staff. She has authored numerous web-based interactive legal education and housing materials for attorneys and litigants for Illinois Legal Aid Online. In 2008, she was named Housing Programs Manager for the Village of Oak Park. She helped create the West Cook County Housing Collaborative, which has secured over $11 million in funding for housing activities in the communities of Bellwood, Berwyn, Forest Park, Maywood, and Oak Park. In 2013, she was tapped to head up the newly created Development Customer Services Department, which oversees all programs related to property improvements, including building permits, inspection, code enforcement, business licensing, parking, planning, historic preservation, zoning, housing, and federal grant administration. You all know our moderator, Jim, and so I'm now going to hand it over to Jim and our 3 panelists to take a deep dive on their perspectives on this very important topic.
It's on. That's it. All right. Let's see. How about that? No? Okay. I think I'll just hold it a little further away. Yeah, he might. It's off. Okay. Is that off?
I think so.
Test.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, how's that? This might be overclocked. All right. Well, I think we're going to have our panelists just start out by talking about, I think, either a project or a particular initiative that they worked on or are in the process with that is related to the topic matter of the day. Obviously, with the perspective of the developer, and architect, and
Why don't we just go with the corded one and folks can pass it?
Yeah, that's what we would do that. Maybe this is further out, but that's really fun.
testing.
There we go.
Very good. Close. So we're just going to start out in that direction because I think we all have our starting spot, right? Everyone's got their, okay. Let me make sure. We had a call. We figured this all out. Trust us. So we'll work our way back this way. How do we do that? We'll start with the developer, the evil Darth Vader developer, right? Working in the up and coming community, right? Yes. Go. Start out.
Let's pass. Why don't you just pass it?
We good. Oh, we got plenty of room. We're good. Yeah, okay.
So Greater Southwest Development Corporation is a 43-year-old CDC. We're based on the southwest side of Chicago. 3 of our zip codes that we work in had more foreclosures in Illinois than any other zip code. When I started about 7 years ago, on the block where our office is, out of 40 homes on the block, 27 of them were vacant and abandoned. A few others were in some state of foreclosure. It seemed like an insurmountable task, really. And so our first priority was to kind of just make sure that we stabilized the community, that there was no additional decline. And so we did that by organizing block clubs and things like that. But ultimately what happened was an initiative called Reclaiming Southwest Chicago. And basically what it was an initiative of is kind of both identifying individuals, either who were from the neighborhood, individuals who currently lived in the neighborhood, or people who maybe needed a starter home or something like that, and identified those people, identified potential lenders who would be interested in investing in kind of rebuilding this neighborhood, and then creating other partners like Home Depot and things like that. But what we did was, the easiest way we really got started with this initiative was to find somebody who had adult kids. They live on the block. Where's your adult kid live? Would they like to come live on the block or next door or something like that? And so it was kind of a combination of getting developers to come in and rehab properties, but also finding people who would kind of do it themselves, and maybe it would take a little bit longer than a traditional developer would take. So it was that kind of combination. We worked hand in hand with the city of Chicago. They started a program called the MMRP. Now what that stands for today, I'm not. But basically the city kind of said, hey, all hands on deck. So they would send code enforcement, they would send the police, they would send building inspectors to ensure that properties did not go into any further decline. With the relationships that we built at Home Depot, certainly we used those relationships, but what it did was it also allowed the individual who was fixing up the home himself. Now I had a bright idea, so since we have the city right here, I'm going to mention it. It's not City of Chicago, but if you look at places, village. If you look at, I kind of equate what happened to the southwest side of Chicago and a lot of other neighborhoods in Chicago, very similar to what happened in New Orleans after Katrina. The neighborhoods were devastated, right? And so what they did in those neighborhoods were maybe they created special zones and they had special tax rates in those zones. So they created different housing codes, different building codes. In Chicago, we don't use the International Building Code, right? So it's significantly cheaper if I don't have to put copper back in the house, because if the house goes vacant, somebody comes in, they steal the copper. I can't rebuild the house now for anything that it's worth. I'm rebuilding a house in a market where maybe I could sell it for $80,000 and it cost me $100,000 to rebuild it. It doesn't make sense long term. It's not sustainable. So by adjusting some of those building codes as in a pilot program, or adjusting some of the tax rates, it helped us to adjust. It helped us to attract people to come back to the neighborhood. It cost us the same to build on 63rd and Western that it would cost to build in Lincoln Park. but I can't get the same rents and I can't sell it for the same price. So we had to come up with some creative ways to do it. I wish I could say that I had final results now, but I can say that there's not one vacant house on the block that I mentioned when we got started. And so we're kind of expanding the zone in which we're working in now and using this as a strategy, not just for the blocks that we work in specifically, but but we're going to other communities kind of saying, this is what we did and it worked very well for our community, and then trying to help them think of strategies that work for their specific communities.
Yeah, just go ahead. Yeah, we're going to kind of go through it all and ask questions to the background. I want to see how
Okay. Everybody hear me? Okay. All right. Never know how close to be to the microphone. Okay. My name is Jaime Torres Carmona. I'm the principal and founder excuse me, of Canopy Architecture and Design. We're primarily a housing and social impact-based firm. I finished, as mentioned earlier, my architecture education through University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. What we call the 4+2 for architects that are out there with the undergraduate and MArch program. And coincidentally, full disclosure, I'm an Oak Park resident and a Oak Park High School graduate. So even though I have my past life in Chicago and Mexico City, kind of a suburbanite here in a way. But with that said, I think for us as architects working primarily in Chicago, the thought of introducing both the opportunity of improving existing buildings and building from ground up. We have been fortunate to pick up quite a bit of opportunities over the years to be able to think more comprehensively about the thought of improving existing buildings. So I know the topic of today's discussion was more geared towards ground up, but I think, especially in the light of the documentation that was done today through CNU, I think it's very important to highlight some of the fruits of housing stock, not only within Chicago and Oak Park and other parts of the county and beyond, but thinking about the intelligence that both developers, municipalities, developers with a lot of kind of heightened ideals and heightened promise within neighborhoods. I think that that's a big value add that with architects alongside, thinking of how buildings really over the past 100 years, what we call the building sciences, and that's really the thought of how from the shell to systems and materials that make a building. I think this is part of the topic today. There's a footnote to be said about really, in a nutshell, most existing buildings that were built from the 50s and back, you can imagine that have about a 20-30 year cycle. So that's to say the masonry portion or the wood frame portion, the bones of the building would sustain themselves, but the things that we see very often are at the 20-30 year period, the roof starts to go, windows start to go, finishes start to go. So when thinking about the cost economics of building or developing a 2 to 4 unit building, those are things that come very much to mind, whether you're a nonprofit developer or for-profit developer. We work with a pretty wide spectrum of housing groups, both for small buildings and large, including one of our clients is over in the back there, Jenny with Evergreen. The thought of from the ground up, if we can just focus on the zone of the 2 to 4 unit buildings, I think there's a lot to say for the cost effectiveness of a smarter building than the traditional. And that's to say the possibility of sustainably inspired projects. So in the topic of, maybe if I have a raise of hands, those that are familiar with LEED certification. Okay, all right, so in the choir here. So I think to imagine buildings that have low embodied energy, but high performance and high longevity. We've had some very good successful prototypes that we call within the 1 to 3 unit building typology. We've had successfully built a couple of LEED certified homes in the Pilsen neighborhood accidentally, but we're working on the third one right now. And these are projects that are being built at about $150 to $160 per square foot. So when you compare the cost of, now these are privately developed projects, these are not government subsidized, so we don't have to, thankfully for those projects, abide by prevailing wage labor. So there's a lot of good things that are happening in those cases where it's a homeowner or really, in our case, a family that wants to expand, a family that has thought of multi-generational living. They might have a mom and dad who's retired, they're building a young family, and they're looking to have both grandparents and grandkids live in one entire kind of zone. So it's that kind of fundamental mindset that there's value in the smaller building that I think speaks very heavily to what we're seeing in that smaller scale. But thinking of kind of two barrels, there's what we call the curating barrel of where you're thinking very kind of more on a restoration level. You're thinking of improving existing buildings. But there's the other barrel of what we call more the new conceived or the new conception type projects. But we could always make the case for salvaging a good building if there's not structural compromise. So just to paint a little bit of a perspective on the curated portion, but for the new conception, we think that's an even bigger opportunity to think about program, to think about how people use a home. So if it's an issue of the typical traditional home has a kitchen, living, dining room, which are more kind of square rooms. When you think about a new building design, people nowadays don't rely strictly on the relationship between living and dining space. That sense of the formal dining room, we've seen some trends in that there's a lot more shared space, so then we're able to consolidate common areas and really concentrate on sleeping zones. I live in a home just a mile south of here, and our closets, both our bedroom closets are 2 foot deep by 5 foot wide, and that's the way houses were built way back when, right? But so we've seen kind of a heightened sense of storage. People need more storage space, but people need more kind of shared space. So that's just kind of our window, kind of how we see opportunity and promise within this type of a building. Good stuff.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you guys enjoyed your walking tour of beautiful Oak Park, even if it was a little warm outside. But I have to confess, I did go back to the office in air conditioning and do some work. So,
Thank you for your lovely tree camp.
yes, right. So, I think with Oak Park, we're a pretty built out community. We're also a very congested community. We have about 11,000 people per square mile in the village, and so that's a very high level of congestion. I've been with the village since about 2008, working in the housing programs, community development block grant funds, and now in development customer services. I think the thing about Oak Park is that historically, going back to the 70s, the village really took a proactive view on how to preserve the character of the village, how to preserve our walkable streets, how to preserve our older homes. And so, we did create a lot of historic districts. We also made sure that infill development is contextually relates to the neighborhood that it's being placed in. And we've tried to, in the past several years, put the congestion, the number of people, the higher rise buildings in our downtown area because we specifically wanted them to be transit-oriented types of development where we think that allows us to have people that can walk to our downtown area and shop in our downtown area, which also improves the market for small businesses in the communities. We have several, if you haven't been downtown, I highly recommend it. We have several small shops that are privately owned, and the reason, and national retailers mixed together. And I think the reason that we were able to do that is because we have people that are out and about during the day, people that are out, in our office buildings, and people who are out at night because of the new apartment buildings that are coming in. I think one of the things related to affordability for those particular apartments is the parking issue. So, you know, as a community, one of the tensions we always have is all those units need to have 1 or 2 parking spaces. When you put parking in those big buildings like that, that costs a lot of money for the developer. And so as part of a new zoning code rewrite, we actually reduced the parking requirements for transit-oriented developments, because we really believe that the future is that people won't be relying on cars. They might be using shared vehicles. We have a ton of shared vehicles in the village in a variety of spaces, variety of areas, because we really think that's the future for you know, for us in the United States. Some of the other things that we've done is we've been very strategic in making sure that we create programs that will help low-income people. We have we have a nonprofit developer in the community called the Oak Park Residence Corporation, and over the years we've given them a lot of money to buy troubled buildings in the village and help rehab those buildings, and then make sure that 20% of the units are affordable to low-income people, as well as being integrated racially. Additionally, we've provided funding to single-family homeowners who maybe can't afford the down payment necessary for entry into the village. Over the several years, we had a down payment assistance program, which we're considering putting back in place again, which kind of stopped in the 2008 during the economic recession. The other thing that we have done is we've created a small rental rehab program where we provide assistance to building owners to rehab their units to make them more marketable, and then in exchange for that, forgivable grants, not something they have to pay back. They have to agree to rent to 51% of their units to low-income people for a period of time, depending on how much money they receive. We also have a program called our Multifamily Housing Incentives Program, where we give funding to larger buildings, 4 units or more. And again, it's forgivable. They don't have to pay that money back. It's $1,000 per unit, or a max of $10,000. In exchange for that funding, they have to improve the marketability of their units, work with the housing center, Rob, who gave you the tour today, to make sure that those buildings are integrated, and that we don't have any identifiable pockets of population in any geographic location within the village. We want to have a very integrated village. Is very important to us. We did receive funding in 2009. Well, the village was instrumental in creating the West Cook County Housing Collaborative, because we believe that as our neighbors go, so does Oak Park. And so as part of the recession with the high foreclosure rate, we created the collaborative. Our village president at the time, David Pope, was very instrumental in working with the other communities to create the collaborative. We were able to receive neighborhood stabilization program funding to rehab some units in Maywood and Bellwood, the apartment buildings that were in foreclosure. We were also successful in getting funding from the Attorney General to do some foreclosure work in terms of rehabbing buildings, 2 to 6 flats and single-family homes that were in foreclosure, and then turning those over back into the market. And we worked with a nonprofit developer with that as well. We also received a Community Sustainable Challenge grant from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And with those funds, we created each community created a new comprehensive plan, which also would lead to the creation of new zoning ordinances. And the funds were also used to rehab 2 to 6 flats in our neighboring communities, not in Oak Park, because we felt the need was greater in the other communities. And that's being done by the Illinois Facilities Fund, now known as IFF, right? So I think that, you know, we do show a large commitment to having a very balanced housing stock. We just updated our zoning ordinance. We have allowed coach houses to be built, which in the past we have not allowed, so the zoning ordinance allowed for that now. And, you know, we also were, with our building codes, we're also very sensitive that in these older homes, older buildings, we have to be very strategic in how we enforce codes, and additionally in how we interpret building codes for rehab activities as well. So I think that's probably a good place to stop for me.
A couple of things. What's the, do you know the running cost here, since your title says you're the master of all departments, so you must know all the numbers. If you don't know, it's fine. Because you guys are having some larger buildings here on your main street here downtown that have some structured parking, do you know the number, the cost of a structured parking space? I'm just curious.
It's about $30,000 to $35,000 per space.
So let's run a little math on that. I won't be able to do it in real time, but usually when that number is between $30,000 and $40,000 a space, that translates to between $300 and $400 a unit in additional rent per month, right? So what's the rent spend like for one of those new buildings?
Like 13 to 25.
Okay, so the rent is already at 13 to 25. Like $100, right? So talking about affordability, right? That's a real number, right? And so those are balances, right? Those are balancing acts with both policy as well as building, right? We know the challenge it is to put, because what typically happens is when you build a building with structured parking, it's the size and efficiency of the underground parking or the structured parking that drives the entire footprint of that building, right? So you end up doing all kinds of wild and wacky things in order to get that magic 60-foot dimension, or maybe 56 if you're really squishing it and you have a great municipality, will let you have a 20-foot aisle instead of a 24-foot aisle, right? All these little pieces of negotiation. It all costs money. It's all real. You can't hide that anywhere. Maybe you can get a few great grants, but those pieces are very important. And so while you can take advantage of the ability to be so close to transit, and I say from being here 10 years ago, I don't recognize that walk anymore. It's a good thing. It's a good thing in the sense that if not there, where? And in a place that is trying to find a positive way to evolve and adapt as a neighborhood, that's important. I wanted to point that out because I think I'm the guy who keeps having to talk about the math today. Probably, hopefully you too as well. And I want to just remind people that when we throw these numbers around, they actually turn out to, in the end, affect, like when people say, oh my gosh, it's a $2,500 a month unit, right? Well, where did that cost come from and how does that spread out inside of a building? I want to work back a little bit on those parking. I want to bring up back towards we were talking about the configuration of buildings and looking at these actually questions for the both of you as you are seeing changes in your where you're working. And I imagine you're both working in very different types of places throughout the community. You're kind of all over, right? Because you have practice everywhere in the city, and you're working in a more specific location. Tell me about the way that these units come together. And for instance, do you have alleys here in Oak Park? Okay, and obviously they have in Chicago. I guess it's important, but we find that the use of an alley is critical to be able to make the function out the back of house work. I wonder if the two of you could talk about your unit configurations in terms of size of unit, number of bedrooms, where you put all the messy stuff. Like, do you still find parking? How do you deal with that? Especially being able to use the functionality of the neighborhood, right? The gridded lots and the alley. How is that working together right now for the buildings you guys are building and or rehabbing?
So I'll start. I think for us, the thought of on a typical, like if we were to imagine a box that's 25 foot wide by about 125 feet deep. So if we're looking at a site plan of a typical Chicago lot, which Oak Park has a little bit wider lots typically, and sometimes very long, sometimes very short. And Chicago's I guess precedent for that too. But the typical Chicago lot, the 25 wide by 125, that normally fits 3 tight parking spaces in the back. Chicago code calls for 8 feet for the width of the parking stall. So when you put it all together, you have 24 feet of width, and then one little nubbin of foot. when you do the simple math, a 3-unit building works, but a 4-unit building becomes a challenge. So that's one of the thresholds on the typical Chicago lot.
Parking off the alley, that's 3 slots off the alley. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then if we dissect that just for a second a little bit more, if you take trash and recycling, when you start thinking of other things that are not as exciting to think about, but things that make the building and the house work. When you think about trash in Chicago, there's not a hard rule yet about how much area you need for your trash bin and your recycling bin. Being an Oak Park resident, of course, we keep the same thing too. Now we're neighbors between Chicago and Oak Park. We all keep our trash and recycling in big, tall bins, right? So that's the thing that the city can't enforce a code where some people live in what we could call existing non-conforming conditions, where you have not enough space for what the current code requires. So just talking about kind of service space and trash, the things that people don't want to talk about, but are the things that the village is probably getting a call out every day about, right? So when we think about service, use, and access, not only to get parking spaces to the back of the site, but then those other pieces, that's definitely a big constraint. But then again, the tipping point is 3 units and above. On a typical lot, it becomes a challenge. But then touching on bedroom sizes and unit sizes, typically, at least in Chicago, there are great architects in Oak Park too. Tom Dassadilli, I don't know if he's here, but he designed a beautiful single-family home, a LEED certified home, just not too far from where I live, and that is about a 1,500 square foot, if not smaller, single-family home. And I know we're talking about 2+ units, but it was built very affordably, and it was meant to be a net zero building, meaning that it performs in a high fashion because of the envelope performance. It's a very airtight building that doesn't require a lot of mechanical equipment to function. So taking that example and running that within the typical Chicago, for the example of what we have in our studio, 2 to 4 unit new construction projects that are also energy efficiency driven. Those are normally the 1 unit, if it's a 2-bedroom unit, it's about 1,000 square feet. And once you go closer to 3 bedrooms, it's 1,300 square feet. And obviously 1 bedroom would be about 800 square feet or so. So we're not going too far from what, for example, agencies like the Illinois Housing Development Authority, IDA, they have minimum requirements of how big a 1-bedroom apartment, 2-bedroom apartment, 3 would be. So we're not going too far from that minimum, but we're not going towards like the mega, McMansion type size homes. We're talking about urban infills.
Yeah, I'll add on to you and talk about this.
Sounds like you want a single family right now to stabilize the neighborhood. But I'm guessing from what I understand, working with some of your colleagues in nearby neighborhoods in Washington Park, that after a block gets stabilized, you also are trying to maintain legacy residents who probably have a changing need for their housing. So you want to keep the people and find a place to put them, and that's going to help them survive, not survive, they're going to help them to thrive in the community, because you need the stability of someone being there for a long period of time. But they need a different housing choice than they had for 40 years by being there. I'm wondering, are you reaching that point now? You've brought people back to the neighborhood. How is that pushing the next envelope of, okay, now we stabilize the block and they're all filled. What's the next thing? What do we do for the vacant lots? How do we begin to make that next? And I'm curious to know what's happening in that 2 to even 12 unit range in the neighborhood, because I imagine there's some multi-units sprinkled in.
So switching from the southwest side of the city to Washington Park. Well, I would do one other thing first. So he talked about 800 square foot, 1 bedroom. We're developing a building on the campus of IIT, and we're doing micro units, not New York style micro units, not 300 square foot micro units, but a 1 bedroom, 500 square foot unit. And while I would never want to live in that, and most of you guys would never want to live in that.
But wait. Who's lived in a 500 square foot unit?
Really?
Me
Wow.
too.
Okay.
Me too, right? So, just because we don't now, it's always remember, when, at some point in our lives, we might need to.
So what we found is that young people, they don't care about a car. They don't want a car. Even if they could have a car, they don't want a car. They want to take the bus. They want to ride their bike, get on the train. And so we are developing some micro units, and we found that to be very interesting. We own about 300 units. Majority, I would say, probably 80% 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, and then the balance, I would say, is 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. Very few 1 bedrooms in the neighborhoods where we work. 1 bedroom, unless you're talking about a senior building, is not going to be a good. You're not attracting the right population for the neighborhoods that I work in. You'll have about 6 people in a 1 bedroom, and they broke the lease like the first day they moved in. So in terms of unit size, in terms of that, but we control about 1 million square feet of vacant land in the Washington Park neighborhood, and that's the same place where these 300 units are. So the 300 units is a lot of people who already lived in the neighborhood. And so one big part of what we do with that is we hire those guys to take care of the other buildings. So we create a management company to make sure that they have some employment opportunities. And looking at the vacant land, in terms of how we plan that, we've planned townhouses, single families, 2 to 4 units, some 6-unit buildings, some 12-unit buildings, and 1 mid-rise building. The thought being, okay, I'm a single guy, I just need a little apartment, I'm gonna move into the 6th flat. Maybe I get married, maybe I move into the townhouse. I have a kid, I move into the single family, right? Maybe I wanna invest in real estate, so now I buy one of the 4-unit buildings or something like that. So to kind of create this ecosystem in the community. Now also to talk about, your original questions was alleys. I went to Italy maybe about 2 years ago, a little beach town, and we got a real interesting idea. Everybody didn't have the garbage can as soon as they walked out of their apartment. They had a half a block walk or something like that. It was one centralized place where everybody put their recycling. But that place kind of became like a little gathering place. There was a little playground not too far from there. And so you started to see people gather around there. As a result, a lot more people were recycling, right? Nobody was just sneaking and putting it in their regular garbage, right? Because now everybody sees you going to the garbage can. If you didn't put something in the garbage and in the recycling, shame on you. So how to change people's behaviors is also a part of what we think about. Also, since the topic of affordable housing came up, in the neighborhoods I work, I doubt if, I shouldn't say I doubt. No time soon I'm going to get to building anything LEED because I can't afford to do it, and the rent that I can collect and that kind of thing. But when we think about affordable housing, the city code may say insulation, you have to have this level of insulation. But when we think about affordable housing, we don't just think about how much rent you have to pay. We think about utilities, right? Is that kid's gonna have to sleep in a jogging suit at night. And so that's the kind of place where we say, as a developer, maybe it costs me an extra $2,000 to do this, right? But what we found is that we get a lot more loyalty in terms of those people in the communities that we serve. And so I've even encouraged the city to kind of make it mandatory. If you take Section 8, you should include a higher standard of insulation. You should have LED lights. You should provide some standard level of Wi-Fi for the building. Because if I can't communicate with my kid's teacher, because that's how you talk to the kids' teachers now. It's on email. You don't go up to the school. You don't call the school. It's all email now. And so to really think about how are we really building a community, that's a big part of what we really try to take into consideration to really make a real neighborhood. I live in the same neighborhood I grew up, but I moved away, lived around the world. I came back, and I was considered to be a gentrifier. Even though I grew up 4 blocks from where I live right now. But the lady, my next door neighbor, at the time she was probably 85, but I was taught to shovel the lady next door's snow or cut her grass and that kind of thing. And so that's the place where I really feel like you have that value of the old and the new, because it gives you. Kyle heard me tell this story yesterday. Anybody ever been to New Orleans and had gumbo? Right, gumbo is a delicious meal, but if you just had water and shrimp in it, shrimp soup, it wouldn't really be that good. When you put tomatoes in it and okra and nice seasonings and all of that, now it's the delicious meal that we can really enjoy. And this is where the flavor of having the people who've been there, who know the history, plus the new people coming together, and you find those commonalities.
Shrimp soup, I'm taking that one. I'm taking shrimp soup. I love the gumbo analogy. I'm going to ask a couple sticky questions, and I want to see how there's supposed to be a debate. I didn't think it was going to be a debate, but I think there's going to be some differences of opinion about how we can handle these issues. Two issues. How do you handle stormwater on sites that are not single family? And now, I just heard that you guys have a different building code standard in Chicago. I don't know if you guys if you guys riff off of that in the community surrounding or not. Are you requiring it, or what threshold, if you are requiring sprinkler systems in either existing or new buildings? So stormwater and sprinkler systems. After you figure the parking thing out, the next two things that are going to trip up your missing middle housing: sprinkler systems and stormwater. Oh, I see a lot of head nod. This is sensitive. All right, who wants it first?
Yeah, I'll go first, because I can answer the stormwater pretty easily. So, there's the water reclamation district, and they are responsible for making the rules related to stormwater detention regionally. So the village doesn't have a lot of control over that, although we do, as part of our zoning, look at the amount of lot coverage for single-family homes and for other larger buildings. And then the second question about sprinklers, this was, when we adopted our new building codes, this was a huge debate within the community. Do we require sprinklers? Do we not require sprinklers? We've had a lot of fires in our community where, multifamily house buildings have gone down, single-family houses have gone down. We have a very old housing stock. But ultimately what we decided was that new construction, no question, has to be sprinkled.
At what threshold?
Single family home or more has to be sprinkled. And then anything, but we don't require sprinklers in rehab activities, as well. So that was the kind of the compromise that was reached. And I think part of it was we had a couple large house fires where it was, people saw what the real impact is of having houses that are so close together. And when one of them catches fire, their neighbors are going to get damaged. It just happens. It's just a fact of life.
30 and 25-foot lots.
Yep.
It's not very much elbow room.
Right.
If I can dovetail a little bit to that. One thing to also add, distinction between suburban municipalities against the Chicago Code as it relates to fire protection and life safety. The other thing that I think, makes a distinction between Chicago and Oak Park, for example, the current code, the International Building Code, describes the need for fire alarms, or so I should say, smoke detectors within the home. That's one difference on a rehab project that doesn't apply in Chicago. If you're rehabbing a Chicago home, you don't have to wire your smoke detectors. But in Oak Park, the minute you renovate your kitchen or your bathroom, then you're supposed to have connected smoke detector system. So that's one thing that if you're a homeowner, if you're just about to buy Chicago versus the suburbs, or particularly not the actual part, present here, but yes.
Somebody had to integrate your smoke system sometimes recently.
That's something to consider, right?
No, I had to too.
Right.
I live in Oak Park too.
So in terms of fire protection sprinkler systems, we actually, here's a home in Pilsen. It's a 2-unit home, LEED certified home, the one I mentioned that is built at $150 a square foot. That home is a near net zero performing home, and that is super airtight. The mechanical systems for both summer months and winter months do not have to perform as high as the average home. So that project, because it was a code-driven concern to have security by having a second stair at the back of the home, The homeowner asked the question, do we really need the back stairs for code? And I said, well, we looked into the code and we said, you know, we can actually get an exception if we implement a sprinkler system. So we asked the question to the general contractor. We said, can you help us look at the trade-offs? A $20,000 back stair versus a sprinkler system in the home for 2 units. Now, it's not a single-family home. 2 floors for 1 family on the upper 2 floors, and the garden unit would be the in-law suite.
3-story building.
3-story building, right? So for that example, it turned out cheaper, more cost-effective to think of sprinkler systems at $15,000 in Chicago throughout the whole home, and now they have, in theory, a more secure home.
So
But
plastic.
it's still not a code, it's not a
Plastic,
census
so you had
required.
a plastic R13 sprinkler system that was $15,000, that I heard,
Right.
versus $20,000 for the staircase,
Right.
exterior staircase.
Right.
Huh.
So I think in Chicago, I think the more that other municipal groups lean towards sprinkler systems, I think Chicago will eventually adopt some requirements to that, but.
I got a big rise out of you
I
at the
know,
end of
I
my
know.
sprinklers though.
Well, first of all, he already said $150 a square foot. That was all my profit was already paid for. Yeah, no. The sprinkler system, it might, we just did one. So first you have all of the headaches that come with the installation of it. You have the ongoing monitoring, the expenses of monitoring it. I've never done it in a single family, but in a commercial building, ongoing expenses. I got a call today from the fire sprinkler company. Hey, we got some kind of alarm. So I had to stop what I was doing, go down there, check the alarm, make sure everything was okay. So the sprinkler system, I see it in commercial buildings in a residential setting. Maybe I need to come talk to you and you explain it to me a little bit better. I don't see it, just from a cost perspective.
Ongoing costs.
Yeah, as far as stormwater, I think that, one, again, because we're looking at a much larger area, right? So we can kind of think and say, how can we in our new developments kind of share the cost? If I'm building 400 homes, where can I put some kind of centralized water retention system or something like that? But I also think that we have to start looking at things like gray water, which we cannot use in Chicago. We have to start thinking about what kind of plants can we use that will absorb the water a little bit more. We're doing a project right now where, on some of the land that we own, where we planted almost a full city block of sunflowers, absorbs the water, remediates, something called phytoremediation, where sunflowers help to remove contaminants out of the soil. So we have a high lead counts in a lot of the soil where buildings were torn down because of the lead paint. So we're doing things like that. But I think gray water is probably one of the most simple things that we can do that would, you collect rainwater, right? And you use it for toilets.
Do you have a prescriptive system here at all for like middle range buildings, or see a 50-foot lot? What is it going to be like to put a stormwater system? What do you do and not have to do? Sorry, who wants to take that?
Right. Yeah, I think that's one thing that we haven't really touched on. From the design standpoint for stormwater management, of course, you have sump pumps that would redirect the water back out of the building and back and away. Older buildings, a lot of times were not designed with drain tile systems, so that's one challenge on the older home, to introduce better drainage around the perimeter of the building. But for new code, yeah, I think for Chicago, you can think of it on more of a performance basis. There's not a hard rule for meeting stormwater ordinance requirements. Smaller sites don't have to have what's called a stormwater ordinance review. So there's a project we're designing for a 48-unit affordable development, with evergreen development. Shout out to Jenny over there. For that project, we have to go through a City of Chicago-based stormwater ordinance review, and that's very extensive. And we have to think about ways to in some cases, retain stormwater on site in a more heavier fashion, whether it means wells underneath the ground, if not all percolating within the earth. And for us, we believe in the simple rule of touching the earth lightly. So I think in imagining that permeable pavers could slow down the movement of water as the rain is coming in, but simultaneously thinking of the advantage of downspouts and really the very simple kind of low-tech versions of managing water. We think if it's done in a clever way, of course, like, we know it's not a good thing to bring that stormwater back to the combined sewers, but no park in Chicago, so yeah, so there's not a hard rule, at least in Chicago, with the village I'm not as familiar with, but
What's the size of the lot you're gonna have to be under the review?
I think it's like, maybe the other Chicago architects here know this better, but so the site that we have with Evergreen, it's a 5-lot wide site, so that's definitely one where we need to meet the city's
There's
regulations.
5 lots triggers a review. How much does it cost your civil engineer to do that review?
It's at least a few thousand.
A few $1,000s. Okay. So yeah.
And that doesn't go, that's the soft cost, but that doesn't take into account the additional hard costs to implement some of those.
Most places that I see, when you get to the point of a couple lots, right, and even if you get some pervious pavers, some fanciness, it snows here, one day you'll get some grant to put pervious pavers in a project, I guarantee you, and then we'll be back here in 5 years and you'll be pounding the table about maintenance, about pervious pavement, right, because it's a thing. You gotta bring the truck in, and they gotta suck all the stuff that got stuck in the perviation areas. So all these things, there's always pros and cons. And we're trying to manage water. We're trying not to overflow our combined sewer system. That costs a lot of money in terms of pay our taxes back up. But then we all have to share that load of that maintenance. And so all these things are back and forth. And in a small project, I'm really glad that you guys are being able. I mean, by fortune of that you have that much vacant land, you can rethink it for the 21st century, right? You have a chance to get that right. Where in a place like Oak Park, you got to do with what you can do. And so I think what's tricky about where this 2- and 3-story building stock that we're talking about today, where it fits into the existing context of wherever you're at, is important, because unfortunately it's always in the places that have like this awkward fit. It's never quite right. Like, it's not as simple as a single-family house, but not nearly as complex as a full commercial project at a main corridor, right? And so a 5-lot building, is it 5 25-foot lots? 5, yeah, so it's 125 feet. Yeah, it's gonna be about a quarter, 3, probably a third of an acre. And so a third of an acre to have, to bury a stormwater retention tank, right? To both have quality and water quantity, that's pricey. I think I mentioned in my presentation, that's like getting that pallet of cash and digging a hole and sticking it in the ground and letting it soak in a lot of water. Basically, that's what's going on. And so just like the parking requirement, right? Burying a bunch of pipes in the ground, also you can go right back to dollars per month in rents, right? And so we're trying to balance utility costs to keep people warm with managing our environment. It's tricky. And so what's important to understand is all of you are involved, especially those of you who are involved in the municipal environment. Maybe not all of you have the number of departments that you get fed up to you to get all these levels of indicators. This is why it's important to engage with your professional development community to better understand how every one of these little elements affects the bottom line. Because as policymakers, those of you in the group who are policymakers, your bottom line is affordable housing. You're trying to put X number of units in and X number percent AMI. But it's driven by all these other factors in your ecosystem, like parking, like stormwater, like sprinkler systems. And I can see the anguish. I can tell the number of meetings you've been in talking about this subject, right? But we got to be careful. And everything that we do in Incremental Development Alliance is talking about thresholds, because we cannot have a one-size-fit-all solution at the scale we're talking about in the missing middle. Like every couple of units, we're going to a different threshold, whether it's a financing threshold, a stormwater threshold, a parking threshold, a zoning code threshold, a egress threshold for building. The magic behind the 3-story, 12-unit walk-up building I showed you is that it is right that the top unit, the farthest point of the top unit, is a certain distance from the door to get out. Right? That's the fire safety piece of it. And once you go to a 5th story or 4th story, or once you go to a wider building, right, you can't make that number work anymore. And it turns that 3-story walk-up building into a huge, much larger double corridor elevator building, because you're at 162 feet, not 150 feet. That completely changes your entire building, right? that's what's so important. I know from your perspective as an architect, since I have an architectural background, sometimes the development community doesn't understand that. Even the people who are in charge of this don't understand those parameters, right? They tell you to guess again. I know we're allowed 14 units with the zoning code, and you gave me 12. Well, 12 doesn't make my numbers work. Try again. And I was like, but no, we can't, because I will go from $150 a square foot to 175, and then your project really doesn't work. Right? So this is the back and forth, and there's a disagreement here about where, and that's what's important to understand about where each of these communities are at. Your built environment versus your built environment. What are we, 5 miles apart? Right? We're all working in the same region. So this is a great opportunity to kind of get into the levels of nuance that we are at, because it's these thresholds of nuance that make or break this thing that we all see is very important. And unfortunately, we've lost that level of sophistication. And it takes a certain amount of familiarity to be able to say, you know what, if I have to think about all these things for a third of an acre site, I might as well have a 3-acre site. And I can find lots more of those someplace else. And that's why we don't see the development we want to see today. So I just want to kind of wrap up a couple of these threads here, and now open it up to all of you. And I think Kyle is going to see if we can make one of these, maybe if we're further away, we might be able to give that a go. I'll read the mic. And open it up to questions.
We'll give this a try, and if we have some feedback, maybe we'll find another way of doing it. But it seems to be working fine.
Go further out.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists?
I'm gonna start. Not two. Cheers. My question is.
Just go ahead and talk loud, and we'll play it by ear, folks.
Is it Ghian or?
Ghian.
Ghian, sorry. I kind of pointed at you, like, I totally agree about needing, like, the smaller scale, mid-density development and, desirable and already populous communities, but in Chicago, there are huge areas that are, like, walkable, transit served, have, like, great historic housing stock that have a lot of potential that are, like, going completely underutilized on the south and west sides because of a lot of reasons, like, and a lot of history that's not necessary to go into, but like, for economic reasons, for public safety reasons, and people being like put off by like vacant lots or like abandoned housing there, it's a huge missed opportunity because these are places that like if people were interested in pursuing a home there, then you wouldn't have places like Logan Square being so, like overwhelmingly expensive and things like that. So it's a huge difference between areas that like, when you compare the built environment, they're the same. But it's like, oh, this is on the blue line versus this is on the green line on the south side. So like, the economically and the property values are just like, couldn't be further apart. But and it's a huge question, it's something I think about a lot, but you were saying about like building, either whether it's through rehab or like building new housing, it sounds like you have people who are interested in, buying places at affordable prices. So I'm wondering like, if you are in a community that's like relatively like destabilized, because of like crime or like vacancy rates or things like that, have you found that if you build like reasonably priced and attractive housing, that there is a demand for it, like people want to come there? Because I mean, I think a lot of times people look at it the other way around. We got to solve like the crime issue, or we got to solve like the, these other kind of like public safety or just general like quality of life issues. Then people will want to live there, but maybe,
Yeah, so to answer your question directly, the answer is yes. But I think that you have to have a comprehensive plan that goes along with that. It can't just be, I'm going to build a house and somebody's going to move in. But here's the game plan. Part of what we have to do is we have to start to change the language that we use. Rather than an abandoned lot or vacant lot, it's an underutilized lot, right? there has to be some vision for it. So the fact that we have 1 billion square feet of vacant land, we had to pay an architect and say, what will this look like when it's populated? So when you say, I got a new family, I can buy this 2,000 square foot house in Washington Park for 300,000 instead of going to whatever is the equivalent of 5,500 north, I can go to that neighborhood and buy one for 800,000. Now you have a choice to make, right? And you can say, man, I can get downtown in 15 minutes on the Green Line and ride my bike, and I'm a few blocks away from the University of Chicago, and I do, my house is not right next to each other, I can spread out a little bit more. Or do you want to be where it is a lot of bars and that kind of thing? You gotta, I mean, everybody is different. When I moved to Kenwood, the only thing that I could walk to in my neighborhood was Walgreens. Right? Now there's a lot more. Right? Now, would I want to live for 15 years where Walgreens is the only thing I could walk to? No. But I saw a vision where some other things were coming, right? And so I think that that's a part of what it is. Crime, absolutely. I'm going to make a decision about if I'm going to live a place if it's crime. So that's why we have to come up with a plan to employ those guys. This is the most simple strategy that we did. The guys that were selling heroin and cocaine and weed on the block, there's no money. Drugs is less than minimum wage, all right? So we said, guys, a lot of this, what you guys are doing is because you don't have anything else to do, and a lot of it is because it's social. You get to hang out with your buddies all day. So I tell you what, we went and bought t-shirts that said security.
Yes.
And then it came our security. We said, do not let anybody hang out on this block in front of these 4 buildings. And the other owners from other blocks came over later and said, man, what happened? All of the bad traffic stopped hanging out in front of your building and hanging out in front of ours. We employed them.
Right.
The crime in front of our buildings went down. We have not had a break-in in any of our buildings. The guys that we're putting in jail, they want opportunities just like everybody else wants opportunities. And so we just have to think about that.
That's great, yeah. It's so much better than hearing like the city talk about, oh, we need more cops or what, bring in the National Guard. It's like,
If we brought, I'm on the Chicago Police Board. I'm the Vice President of the Chicago Police Board. If we brought in the National Guard, it would not make not one difference. I heard an AK-47 the other day. Has anybody in the military, anybody ever served in the military before in this room? I heard an AK-47 shot a block away from my office the other day. I can still hear the sound in my head today. You never heard a sound. It sounds like whatever you think a dragon sounds like, that's what this thing sounded like. And so it's one of these things where people live like this, right? And they don't, I'm telling you, if this thing is stuck in my head, it's stuck in their head too. They don't want to live like that either. But what's the alternative? We have to create some alternatives. I'm sorry, I don't want to take
No, you go.
In Philadelphia, they have a program called the Philadelphia Land Care Program. And they don't have the city of Philadelphia cutting the grass. They went to the local CDC and said, find us a local landscaper, and we want you to hire ex-offenders and unemployed people and underemployed people and let them maintain the underutilized land. I'm not going to say vacant land. The underutilized land. They cut the grass, they planted bushes, planted trees, put up fencing. Nothing fancy. A 2x4, a 2x4, a 2x4, a 2x4. Painted. And it made the neighborhood look nice. Those people had a job. Not a living wage job, but it gave them some form of income.
At some point, now that they have a job, they need a place to live.
That's correct.
And they have something to put towards that.
That's correct.
Put that back around, because it's like, that's it, that's why we're doing this.
That's right.
That's why we're doing this. Go ahead.
Maybe if I can add to that too. I think to this question of housing equals better economic mobility and social mobility, if we use that equation, I don't think that's a silver bullet per se. I think for us, we found successes in the 2 to 4 unit typology when there's already an economic engine through retail corridors, through business corridors. But I think, so an example for in a Chicago neighborhood where things didn't totally work out on a 2 to 4 unit big round of rehab and new construction homes at that scale, the NSP2 program, which I don't know if any like founders of that program right here, so I'm not trying to cast shadow on it, but the NSP2 program had a lot of criticism over the past few years. The neighborhood stabilization program, I think it stemmed from the federal government, but it came and trickled down to many neighborhoods around, at least from our exposure to Cook County, and gave money to rehab existing homes that were maybe near foreclosure or on distressed properties, and also gave opportunity to develop ground-up projects. So we were some of the architects that worked with a local nonprofit called the Resurrection Project, which is stemming from Pilsen. And in that scenario, it was us and 3 other architects that were hired to design the rehabilitation and renovation of those homes. And even though they received a number of awards on the project, that project itself was not profitable as a nonprofit developer. And in terms of the true economic engine that those 45 homes turned into the back of the arts neighborhood, that became a big challenge in that originally they had the majority of the homes slated for sale, and the other, the smaller portion of homes would go to, workforce housing, rental, and in the end, they ended up switching the equation so that they couldn't sell the homes in enough time. So 80% of those homes became workforce housing for rental, and then the other chunk, they, fingers crossed, they could sell them. They're still, they ended up turning over the majority of those 20% to rentals, and those are actually projects that now, 6 years after working on some of those rehabs, now some of those younger properties we're actually working on the next phase of rehabbing some of those buildings that we didn't get to do everything for. So it's kind of funny how
an incremental process.
Right. Yeah, so even though they had great homes for the neighborhood and residents that were there that were already there, the newcomers to the back of the arts neighborhood, without having a heavy commercial corridor, there's still a lot to ask for within that neighborhood to make really true. If you compare it to Vulcan Square.
There's a question back. Where is that? Yes. Yell it out.
Yeah, I don't have a very long voice, so I'll try. My question's for Tammie, actually. So when you revamped your zoning code, what did you change your parking requirement to for your TOP?
Is this on? Is it on now? Okay, I think it's on. 0.75 per unit.
And that doesn't matter if it's 2 or 3 bedrooms?
Correct.
0.75.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I will add, right, if you already have a whole bunch of 1-bedroom apartments that are old, they read the codes and they tell their clients or their boards, here's what we can do, right? And they're going to do the thing that the path of least resistance. So as a regulatory agency, if you are actually tuned in and are listening to the folks who are out there doing it, saying, hey, we have demand for this rental workforce product, we can't build it fast enough. We thought we were going to sell it, and in fact, we need this other thing. You actually can help be very important to bring more people to do that work if your rules slide that direction. So this is not something that you got taught, right? You learned that, right? Nobody gets taught how to do this, especially in the public sector, unless you came from the development world and then started working in the public sector. And so, which is very, very few people actually. So these are things that are important to kind of understand, but I would encourage you to sit down with folks in your area who are doing some of this work and to help sort of work through this map. How does this work exactly? So the answer is, what I want to caution you is, what works for Oak Park might not work for you, but you can see that sliding scale, that understanding of, if you sit down and try to do it, right? The example you gave of 3 parking spaces, what is the normal parking width in your community for a parking space? Who knows this? Who's in your zoning department?
9 feet.
9 feet. What if you had a 9-foot parking space minimum on a 25-foot lot? Non-conforming parking for a triplex, right? That's a smart move, because otherwise you create all kinds of issues you don't need to create for yourself, because we all know cars are 6.5 feet wide. Go measure your car today. I do it all the time, just to make sure there's not those bigger cars. Go measure, okay, maybe that Traverse is almost pushing 7, but all right? But this is important, right? Because we can make do, right? When you actually strike on-street parking, a lot of it's 7 feet wide,
right? So we can make do with things that are not the engineering standard or some other thing. So calibrate these things to your place, see what actually works. Yes.
Got in a little late. Are there any plans to develop in Oak Park?
Hey, what?
Yeah, are there any plans to develop in Oak Park?
For these guys, or?
Yes, that's for those guys.
Oh, that's
I guess, I mean, we have a lot of development going on in Oak Park. We walk downtown, you'll see we have two major developments. We have a condo building to our north. You're going to hear from Chris Dillian, who's building a condo building to our west, and we are, building a lot of. We have a townhome development on Madison Street. So there's a lot of development going on right now, but I don't know if you guys have any plans to develop in Oak Park. I haven't talked to you about it.
The majority of our work is in Chicago, so we don't actively have projects in the village of Oak Park yet. But the thought of, we're just thinking of the adjacencies from living here in Oak Park. There's a 4-unit townhome live work project, which I'm going to be a huge proponent of. It's the concept of they're micro units, for lack of a better phrase, but the thought is to take 2 existing red brick buildings that flank a block. It's Harrison. It sits on Harrison, which is just north of Eisenhower, between Richland and Austin. And that development is geared for sale townhomes, no more than 4 units, but two stories tall. It's a new little building surrounded by little retail for salvage buildings.
Chris is going to talk about that.
Oh,
Next fans.
I have current plans to, I've looked at projects before. Historic preservation is one of the things that we do. And we've looked at some projects before, but we haven't actually done anything here.
I want to ask one more question here, and then I'll go back. I can't get out of here without talking about construction costs. I just realized looking at our list, and straight up question, one of the ways we can make housing more affordable, especially for new construction that we have, but especially new construction, is how do we find ways, you mentioned this earlier about the difference between having to have fair wages, and by fair wages we don't mean like people can't make their bills, pay their bills working these type of jobs, but there's a market increase for when they get money from you at the government agency versus when they don't get money from a government agency or other things. How can we lower construction costs? What do you think we can do? Okay, we'll start down there.
I mean, I just would say that, I just want to say one thing. I mean, as a proponent of the $15 wage campaign, right? I mean, I do think that we should be paying wages that are appropriate for the work that you're doing. And, it's a struggle for me. It really is a struggle for me because I think that, I'm all for increased wages, and I think that we don't pay workers enough. And maybe at the construction level, maybe there needs to be a balance. But I do think fair wages for fair work is important. My personal opinion.
I think from our vantage point, the thought of modularity and the thought of systems that are shared and doing more with less sounds like an easy thing, but it's really hard to achieve. The thought of, and we've seen some precedents globally that I think very slowly in Chicago and other Midwestern areas will pick up here and there. And I'm super excited to hear and getting the informal survey here that people are living in kind of smaller units and the kind of more modern way of thinking that you don't need tons of space to live in your home. With that said, I think the thought of having units that are a little bit more contained and better designed. Yeah, there's precedents. I mean, there's a well-known Chilean architect, Alejandro Acevedo, which is his name, Aravena. He has been reaching quite a bit of fame for developing projects that are 300 to 400 square feet. But the thought is that those units are set up in a module so that maybe the shell is built for, let's call it a porch, an outdoor space that's got a structure, but could be later implemented to have an extra bedroom or two. So I think that logic of thinking of building a home or building a 2 to 4 unit building in stages we're seeing that happen in our work where we're designing, for example, that one of the other lead homes in Pilsen, coincidentally, that one, it's geared as a 3-unit building, but the family only has the financing to do the full 2 units. The thought is that a couple years down the road, they can build out the 3rd unit, but they're setting up the infrastructure both for parking in the back and doing this themselves. So I think phasing is a thing that, you know, makes a lot of sense for the 2 to 4 unit, even though it's a typology of the larger building. So in addition to modularity, there's, you know, great architects like Landon Baker who are working quite a bit with precast structures, and they've been famous for 5+ years, thinking of buildings that, you know, use 2 or 3 major systems and you know, work them very intricately and intelligently. So I think, you know, that's something that should eventually trickle down to the smaller building, and testing some of those things out.
When there's government money involved, it's limited what your developer fee can be, right? And your developer fee is based on the percentage of the total project. So there's actually disincentive for me to keep the price low. Just plain and simple, right? So we have to somehow realign that compensation structure. I mean, if I were the city of Chicago, I would put out an RFP for drywall. And I would say to my developer, you can go pay whatever you want to pay for drywall, but this is the maximum price that we're going to compensate you for, or 2x4s, or whatever that thing is. Currently, our current compensation structure, it's what breeds the kind of wages that we have to pay. Because, you know, I don't care what we pay for drywall at this point. Let the price be as high as possible, because at the end of the day, it's coming back to me as a developer fee. Secondly, I think that one of the things we have to start taking a look at is, can I build those interior walls or even those exterior walls in a factory and ship it to the site, right? So now it's fewer injuries on the job. If I'm stick building, it's fewer injuries. It happened there. I can employ some of those guys in a construction setting rather than making t-shirts that say security, right? And I can train some additional people and things like that. So those are some of the things that I think that we kind of have to look to.
Awesome. There's one more question back there. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted Tammie to speak kind of directly. Obviously, there's value placed on the multifamily buildings in Oak Park and their preservation and rehab. But we still don't see a lot of new construction. So I just wanted you to talk to what your thought from a policy standpoint, what the biggest roadblock to getting those 2-4 buildings built new in Oak Park, and you guys might be able to
in the housing council too. I'm curious to know what's going on in your collaborative, because there's more land outside of the park.
Yeah. No, I mean, the thing is that in the other communities, as part of our collaborative, you know, it's much easier to the land price. I mean, I'll just say it's the land price, right? And taxes, real estate taxes and land price. And so in Oak Park especially, you know, that's driven by the school system. And, you know, those are the things that, you know, the village doesn't have a lot of control over. I mean, there's this beautiful red brick building that everybody can see out their window is a you know, has a very troubled history. It used to be a hotel. It's got very, very small units in there, and it has a lot of drug activities that happen in this building. It's been for sale now for several months, but no developer can figure out how to make that project work because of the price that the private owner is asking for the building. So what?
$10 million.
Right. So you know, he sees the construction back, you know, the new construction, and he wants more money for his building. But that's a historic building that we're not going to let be torn down. So until the market and the expectation, you know, of the owner match, that's a hard building to, you know, to actually, you know, rehab, purchase and rehab.
We got to wrap up.
All right.
Yes, we can continue to talk offline about what to do with landholders and people who, we have a term for this because there's somebody like that in every community, on every street, in every neighborhood. It always happens. The term, we teach people about pro formas and how buildings make money. And so typically one of our approaches to the building owner who wants a price that is far outstripped by what we were able to do with said building, we say, here is my pro forma. It's a very simple thing. This is just talking about how much you can get for rent and how much it's going to cost to fix things up. I would love to pay you your $10 million for your building. I'm just not smart enough to figure out how to pay you $10 million when the building only cash flows to make it worth $5. I'm simply not smart enough. I'll just leave this with you. You can look at my homework. Maybe you're much smarter than I am. You should just keep this building and figure out how to read. But I'll just leave this with you. Good day, sir. Right? Because even people who own a building that big sometimes lack the ability to understand how that works, where they're at in their context, where they're at in the flow of the cycle of the market. And so just because somebody owns a building, has owned a building for a long period of time, doesn't mean they're a sophisticated real estate developer, missing middle, or anything else for that matter. So don't make that assumption. Goodness knows the people who showed up in my class who've been that person. They're like, everyone keeps telling me my price is too high. And then they actually finally understand the math behind the thing that they own. So don't read too much into someone who has a business card that says they are a developer. That we're not all made the same. And with that, I think it's time for a break.
Most certainly is. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to reconvene for our last part of the day, our coffee shop. So please give a round of applause